Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? Today we're going to talk about an album that changed jazz. And I'd like to do a series on these, but they're quickly going to become very controversial, I think, because there's so many influencers, and it's really hard to pinpoint moments that were singular, that weren't a series of innovations everywhere, and there's not a lot of clear this guy did this first, now here, there. It's not really how it works. There's some elements of it, but there's also a lot of misaccreditation going, which always gets my goat to some degree. But I think this, what I'm about to show you today, is easily and clearly one of the most important records in the canon. And like a Bob Dylan, who came along and changed music not once, not twice, 3 times at least. First with his folk revelations that were earth-shattering. And then a few short years later, he electrifies that mess and brings it to rock and roll and puts that integrity and that message into the pop rock format of social reform and just getting it away from just being about chasing sex, which is kind of the black roots of rock and roll. That's always been about sex. Tootsie Roll, we always wanted to get that Tutti Frutti, the blue suede shoes. It's always very sexual, that black experience. And as I said before, that's kind of their euphoric mansion on the hill. It's the one balm they can always kind of count on, Dylan then, just shakes the foundations of rock with going electric and bringing consciousness to the pop rock format. And then you could argue kind of does it again when he goes Nashville Skyline and even Blonde on Blonde to some degree, where he's really kind of bringing John Wesley Harding folk rock country mix to the whole thing. I'm a big Dylan guy. His influence and impact is pretty astounding. And it's almost greater than the parts. The sum of the parts, the accomplishments, the significance, the ramifications of his songs almost outweigh the songs themselves. And so if you don't see the innovation, it almost becomes tougher to see the greatness of Dylan. And I think there's people out there who don't have the historical context of Dylan, and it makes it tougher for them to value what he does and how he delivers and what he brings to the table. But like Dylan, a young Charlie Parker changes jazz and music dramatically, at least twice. And as a swing player, he is nibbling at the bit, trying to escape the rigmarole of charts and small little 4-bar solos and being part of a sax section. And there's a certain something to be said for being the triad and a great alto chord and a great orchestra. Playing some diminished chord, a flat third, and bringing some, there's something to be said for that kind of composing and arranging. There's a lot of room for that to be done in music. And Ellington, that's why he's so important, is he adds such compositional skills to the improviser's repertoire. Gives them these incredible backdrops with which to splash their color on. But Parker, of course, is the great innovator of bebop. Most people know that. It's not really a secret. Dizzy Gillespie helps him codify it and understands the mathematics of it. That was never really Parker's role. Parker just was doing something that he felt in his soul. He kind of brought that to the world and shakes the foundations of what not just the black players but the white players also, and how they wanted to approach the music. Like Hendrix changed everything for the guitar players in rock and roll, Parker, his innovations of ignoring just improvising on the chords of the melody, but suddenly adding all the notes of the scales, all the intervals, and then still maintaining a pulsing rhythmic precision, and also usually finding a nice resonance or resolve by the end that maintains some of that melodic feeling, but they abandon so much of what the songs initially, what they're doing, sounded like. They're just like that's what hardbop brings back, is that kind of we'll state what the song is and then kind of go off. With bebop, it was like from the opening seconds of Body and Soul, Coleman Hawkins is soloing, and Coleman Hawkins is a big part of that too. That kind of doesn't get as much credit as it deserves before the war, before the recording band. Coleman Hawkins lays down that great version of Body and Soul that's earth-shattering, and so he deserves some of this recognition as well. But it's really Parker who effortlessly is exploring and pushing the boundaries and opens up this new land to all other players on every instrument, saying, I want to approach the music like that. But like most great innovators, geniuses, they rarely stay in one place long. And he developed a real interest in European classical sounds. And he liked country music. Parker was a guy, a student of music. He liked a lot of different facets. And he wanted to bring some of that classical European tradition into jazz somehow. And it's in 1949 where he gets that chance with the great Norman Granz. He records Charlie Parker with strings. This is the 10-inch Clef 501. And there's a second 10-inch that's part of this that's got the bird with the same color layout. I have that on CD, which is actually both volumes together. And then this, when they went to the 12-inch LP, April in Paris, becomes both volumes. So this is probably the easiest way to get the Parker with strings, is this April in Paris, which is Verve 8004. And if you don't know your Verve sequences very well, Verve 8000 through 8010, which is the dawning of that whole sequence. The first 10 records are all Parker catalog. That's been from the 10-inch and 78 era that he's reestablishing that on 12-inch right off the bat, giving that to the world. Here's Parker's work that I've done with him, including this fantastic with strings. And Parker here in 49, with a string orchestra, with a harp, with an oboist by the name of Mitch Miller, who I don't believe went on to play drums with Jimi Hendrix. Pretty sure that's not the same Mitch Mitchell. But Parker single-handedly opens up this door. And in some ways, you could call this one of the first real modern jazz records. It still stands the test of time very well. Even sonically, production-wise, is more connected to the modern era than a lot of Parker's earlier recordings that sound just, there's a date to them, just sonically. This sounds fantastic. And Parker sounds invigorated. He seems to have endless ideation to express upon kind of a stale, stagnant format of a string section. It's kind of rigid in its essence. Charted, laid out. Strings are always... You could almost wear a monocle to play the strings. And you know what I said about the monocle before, what it delineates. And so there's this great sound that captures Paris and Stockholm and Munich and Zurich. It's just got that European... And then Parker effortlessly is floating. There's not really any other word you could use to define it. Zigging and zagging like a bird through the atmosphere. He brings this whole thing to life. He electrifies it. The energy of those beating wings makes a still image come to life. And it really sets the table for the continual immersion of other sounds into the jazz template, which is kind of the continued theme of the next 10, 15 years, is we're constantly taking things from outside jazz and stitching it in and grafting it. From rhythm and blues to rock and roll to the European sounds of modern jazz quartet to all the things that Monk was trying. There's always elements being grafted from the traditions that are outside of jazz. And Parker's one of the first people that not only does it, but does it in such an accessible, exciting, and electrifying way that it makes most other people in jazz sit up and go, oh, that does work. I guess we can do that. You gotta really, whenever you see Verve 8000 through 8010, that's early Parker stuff, and almost all of it, you should have it. It's some of the best sounding Parker recordings out there compared to some of the Savoy stuff, some of the Dial stuff. There's a lot of bootlegs and guys with a tape in their pocket recording Bird, that kind of recordings out there. There's a lot of bad sounding Parker. And to hear Parker at all through any filter is always important and worthwhile. But that's some of the things that people complain about Parker's. Why don't the recordings sound good? There are some great sounding Parker records, and the Norman Granz stuff here is among some of the best. He's starting to decline to some degree here. The drugs are taking his toll, and the drinking. Honestly, one of the toughest things for an addict is the attempts at sobriety. Those can kill you as much as the addiction can. And he's in and out of hospitals, in and out of institutions, in and out of drunk homes and sobriety. It's a real rough ride from Bird. And the legends all exist of him selling people's horns and borrowing them, not returning them. Playing a plastic horn for years because he always pawned off the better ones. It's really an incredible story. And when the man passed away, the Undertaker morgue fella ranked him or rated him as being near 60, if I recall, and he was like 35 or something. And it was one of the great losses in jazz. Parker and then Clifford Brown happens not long after, and we just lost two giants very close in succession. But Parker here, this is kind of the first real modern. That's something that Miles Sketches of Spain is rooted in. See what I'm saying? All those Miles Gil Evans records. Parker's kind of the one that's opened up the gate and allowed those ideas to flourish. The next song is called Just Friends, and he plays a double time solo that's electrifying, and players throughout the history of jazz post this recording have always tried to play Just Friends, and it's easy for me. I can do it no problem, even though I don't play the saxophone. But it's really a revelation hearing him put all the blues, all the gospel, all the blackness of his experience into the saccharine rigidity of almost like a Walt Disney-like soundscape. Suddenly, this ain't Disney no more. The little pixie disappeared. But the melodic feel of it is so blissful, but it swings. And that's a singular ability that the greats have. The Clifford Browns, Louis Armstrongs, even without any rhythm. When I play, the pulse of what I do is so rooted in my tapping foot that I can still easily maintain rhythmic patterns that will always create a swing. The sexual groove of jazz. It's irrepressible. And if you don't got it, you ain't got it. You know what I mean? It's really easy to hear some of that later recording jazz from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and some guys playing saxophone, and there's just no swing to it. He's got some chops, he's got some scales, he's got some honking, he's got even some emotional outpouring, but the swing's not there. And the swing is the joy and the pleasure that the listener needs to be able to digest all your ideations. You can keep it in a pocket, if you keep it swinging hard, if you keep my brain interested with rhythmic patterns that are going to repeat and loop around and come back and do that again in 16 measures, if you have those repetitious concepts that the greats can do kind of effortlessly. I've heard Clifford Brown do something that was so intricate and then come back and do the opposite on the back end of it. Like, it's crazy with some of these guys. Freddie Hubbard can do some things that I'm just like, it's crazy. Incredible talent. But I think this is one of the most important records in jazz. It just really changes the parameters of what a jazz recording can be, sound like, and look like. And I think it's a great place for that next step as a jazz collector. When you want to step beyond just getting the new tone poets and what's hip on the jazz vinyl community, but you want to become a deeper patron of the jazz kingdom. Parker with Strings is a great place to kind of launch yourself at a great doorway, a gateway that for most people is Bitches Brew or Kinda Blue. And they kind of come in there and it's spiderwebs from those places, and they'll dig in the roots a little bit further back, but you really move forward into Coltrane. You move forward into, Wayne Schroeder and Weather Report from Bitches Brew. And that's kind of how the referencing works, especially if you're a rock and roll guy. To go to a record from 1969 dovetails nicely with my Jimi Hendrix, and it pushes me into all that Herbie Hancock, and see what I'm saying? But if you want to find a new focal point to go back and restart and to spiderweb out from, there's probably not a better one than Parker with Strings. Because really, there's so few records after this that you can't on some level hear the birds of feathers that Charlie Parker fluttered about. Like, he's just such a large impact and shadow from that wingspan over the entire jazz kingdom. So I hope you all enjoyed that. I got a couple of things that I did last night. I think I'm going to put them here on the end now, as I was going to put them in the beginning. I think because I did them over the other side of the room, looking this way, trying to change up the look, I think the volume's going to be a little too loud on some of them. And so, that being said, if it is, you can skip them. But I think there's some interesting stuff in there anyway. Y'all be safe. Again, we could use your help if you want to go to Patreon. Help support me and my family right now through this tough time. I lost an important job, and kind of unfairly, I'll add. And if you want to buy some merchandise, there's some great stuff from the podcast, the channel, the Facebook group. There's all that kind of stuff in the merchandise store in the description below. Appreciate you all. Y'all be safe and be strong. While I'm not working, you can probably expect a little more content from me. And I got some other cool ideas I'm kind of gestating, and I'll probably ask for some feedback on those coming up soon. So y'all be safe. Much love. Peace. How you doing, everybody? It's a Wednesday evening here in Minnesota. This is a wonderful record I'm playing here right now. And he's an underappreciated artist. And this is an underappreciated record in his catalog. And we're talking the great Horace Silver. And Horace Silver was one of the most influential and important players coming into the early 50s and then helping to establish the Blue Note sound. And we're so quick to credit Blakey and Mobley and Morgan and all the players that came along. And we forget that the Jazz Messengers start with Blakey and Horace Silver. And when they part ways, Mobley and Dougie Watkins go with Horace Silver. And then Horace Silver continues to be one of the backbones of the Blue Note catalog throughout the late 50s all the way through the 60s. Horace is fantastic. He's just got the gutso. Yeah, I mean, he just got that. Interesting thing about Horace Silver is he made some kind of arrangement with Frank Wolf to have his album cover photos taken out and about. And you don't see Horace Silver's photos all being relegated to just inside the studio being black, really darkly lit studio rooms. A lot of his stuff show him out and about Manhattan, which is fairly unique and very different for the rest of the Blue Note photography at that time. Silver wasn't a big and important piece to the Blue Note canon. Alfred knew it, Frank knew it. As important as Jimmy Smith ends up being, Horace Silver is one of the anchors. And the Jazz Messenger stuff, once they part ways with Horace Silver, once Horace goes his own way, Horace takes on a different type of style of hard bop. It's more of like a soul bop. It's always got a good, strong, striding groove to it. It's always well spaced. And after several lineup changes, Junior Cook and Blue Mitchell tagged down the trumpet sax lineup here for Silver for quite a few years. And Blue Mitchell and Junior Cook have a great rapport together. They're satisfied with making sound in unison as they are being competitive, which is what a lot of jazz players kind of are. It's almost, thank you, Daisy, it's almost wanting to show up the other players. And with Junior Cook and Blue Mitchell, it felt very much about the composition. This big girl here, she doesn't know her own strength. She can't jump into a window without knocking something over. She's very gentle of spirit, soft with her sounds, but she's just a ball of muscle, man. She's something else. But to listen to Horace Silver, who sometimes will tinkle with even a Latin feel, something they're not afraid to, to dabble in. And sometimes it will stride towards rhythm and blues. Sometimes it's firmly anchored in the blues. It always has like that swing, that groove, that prototypical Blue Note sound. But this record here, Finger Poppin', it's always been a favorite of mine. It just has a great feel to it. I believe this track is called Sweet Stuff. And it's got this lovely, soft melancholy to it. You can kind of just drift and smell the aroma. It's wonderful. It's blissful. It's Shangri-La. And I think at the end of the day, so often what these jazz cats are looking for is paradise lost. I've never been given the keys to any kingdom. There was never a throne placed upon my head. But never let it be said that I did not find my euphoria, my Shangri-La here on earth. And I think philosophically wise, it's something that we have to all kind of remember and remind ourselves. What difference am I making? What is all this worth? And you have to make your mark in this world. You have to believe what you believe in and stand for what you stand for. And if you ain't opening a door that no one's ever opened before, or finding a key that no one's ever found before, you're not helping. We're part of a community of humanity. We are part of a human legacy. And we're all supposed to contribute something. And I think we're all given the tools and the ability to walk through some door no one's ever walked through. To find a trap door no one's ever seen. To be a healer, a gatekeeper, a bringer together of people. There's so many different paths. And jazz for these men, it was, like I said, a Shangri-La, a promised land. And all my black brothers and sisters out there, they know what I'm talking about. The music's always been a place of shelter, a place of safety. And all us white cats who've ever struggled and know the darkness as it creeps, music can be a solace, a companion. And if you're a musician, you have the greatest knowledge of how it can be a medicine, you know. So this Horace Silver record, Finger Poppin', just kind of one of those records that gets overlooked a little bit. It's early in the 4000 sequence, 4008. And I think there's a few titles by his that get a lot more recognition. Blowing in the Blues, for example. Song for My Father always gets plenty of recognition. Even some of the later stuff like Tokyo Blues, people always talk about some of those records. Serenade for a Soul Sister. You don't hear people talking about this one that much. I posted on Facebook the other day, and a few other people kind of said that. It's like, why don't people talk about this one much? It's one of the great covers. Beautiful album cover. And like we said, he agreed somehow with Alfred to get some pictures taken out and about Manhattan, which is not something that many of the other cats had the opportunity to do. Paul Chambers gets a couple outside. I think Fat Jones also gets one outside, maybe just one. But most of Horace Silver stuff, you know, 6 pieces of silver sitting in front of a hotel. I think in Waldorf Astoria, if I'm not mistaken. No, yeah, Waldorf. Anyway, so I just want to kind of touch base on that, talk about this record a little bit. It's a fantastic session, and Blue Mitchell and Junior Cook have some of the most amazing interactions, and I find them so often making one sound, being content to play two halves of one thing to be one. And then they do great solos on their own as well, as we can hear Junior Cook right now. Junior made one record, I believe, at Jazzland Riverside. That's a pretty tough record to come by. And we know Blue Mitchell had a fairly big discography of solo work actually at Riverside, and then eventually at Blue Note. And Horace Silver goes on to create new lineups in his group, just like Art Blakey was doing. You know, it's another great school, another great training ground of the young black musicians and furtherance of the disciples of the Blue Note label. And what a stable of guys that is at all points between 55 and 65. It's just this incredible lineup of hungry men with a voice. So I'm just going to leave you with that today, this little tidbit. I'm going to probably put something else on this episode tomorrow morning, and I'll publish it tomorrow. Y'all have a great night. Be safe. Peace. Alright, so this actually caught my ear too. Been hanging out in the record room a little bit right now, and I had some Ben Webster and Harry Sweets Edison together on Columbia. And for those of you who aren't familiar, they played together a lot for Billie Holiday and made some of her wonderful sides for Norman Granz in the early to mid 50s. A lot of those great Billie Holiday records for Verve and Clef have these two wonderful players just adding the saddest, most sincere, most elegant, refined, distilled. Like, when you play behind Billie Holiday, there's not lots of room for you to be flamboyant. You're not going to fill the room up with all kinds of bravado. Like, look how great you're complimenting a goddess. You know what I mean? And she carried a weight. And she wasn't the kind of gal you wanted to have look at you wrong, be like, what are you playing, son? You know, and she loved Sweets and she loved Ben, from what I understand. But Sweets and Ben just got it. And I've mentioned before some of the Billie Holiday episodes I've done, these two have an interplay when they play behind her, that they often finish each other's thoughts and sentences. And Sweets might say something like this muted, and then Webster would be like, bye, but yeah, see, I gotcha. And they catch each other's inflections and innuendos, and those know what the other one's kind of saying without ever stepping on her toes. Howard Roberts plays a lot of those records as well, and Barney Kessel. And Kessel's fantastic. The rhythm section's also fantastic, and there's other people who play on those records. Benny Carter plays on some of them. It's quite a who's who of that era's jazz men playing for Norman Granz and recording with Billy at that time. But the majority of it, and some of my favorite stuff, is stuff with Sweets and Ben Webster adding color behind the kind of not monotone but limited range of Billy's voice. And they put wings on that voice. And Billy's voice has a great sadness and a great sorrow and a weight. It's heavy. Billy's not joking with us. Ella Fitzgerald's got some ding-a-ling-a-ling. You know what I mean? Some joy to the world going on with Ella Fitzgerald. It ain't a game to Billie Holiday. And her time is precious, her minutes are wasting. She's only got so much time left for this world. Everything was important and serious and came across as having significance and having weight. And Ben and Sweets just kind of put wings on that weight and had a little color in the front end and a little sprinkle on the back end and just give her a halo of life and love and joy. And they're that church deacon saying, we got you, pastor. I got you, Rayman, right here. I can feel what you're saying. That's the gospel. And that's so part of this black experience, is that church experience and how it crosses over into the blues and into jazz. And jazz has always got the church interloping through its dynamic, its sound, its spiritual relationship to the music and to their life and their hope and their faith and their dreams. It's interwoven fabric. The church is inextricable from the sound of a lot of these black musicians were doing. It wasn't hard for Aretha to go from the secular to the gospel. Ray Charles. It's a pretty seamless transition for, and it's funny how that church, that blues, that jazz, that rhythm and blues becomes rock and roll. It shapes so much of the modern vernacular. And it's so subtle that we don't even hear it slip into our modern music, and it's still how omnipresent it is. But somehow Ben and Sweets Edison, Harry, don't make a lot of records together. And they rectify that here with Columbia. My friend Jean-Michel Reeser mentioned this record to me. He's like, you have it? I'm like, actually I didn't. So I bought it, and I've had it for about a month now. I listened to it like 3 times now. And the cover, it's fairly forgettable. It's not a great cover. If this had a great monochrome color picture of the two of them, and this was just black, and a great, font, and this is just not great graphic design. So it's something you see and you can pass over real quickly. And for all you can tell, Ben Webster and Sweets Edison wanted to do one together. This could be just some compilation of vintage dates that, it's not very eye-catching or compelling to look at. Columbia, for all they did great. Their art department's really hit and miss. There's some great stuff, but there's some pretty clanky-ass design as well, which is a shame, because if this had a greater cover, I think this album would have a lot more notoriety. A great cover makes a big deal of difference. It just gives you that signifying, recognizable, iconic thing, and that's never going to be this. But to hear Sweets and the Brute, Ben Webster, and they're quite different cats from what I've read and learned of what my friend Jean-Michel has told me. Harry's one of the sweetest guys, very genuine, very gentle, lighthearted, comic, just a lot of fun to be around. And Ben Webster was more of a giant of a man with an alcohol problem. And from what I gathered, he could be a little testy at times, but still these two, there's just such a mutual respect. You know, it's like we've broke bread together so many times. We've cooked in the same kitchen. I know exactly what seasoning you just put in that pot. I know exactly how many ladles of water I need to add to that. Got you. See what I'm saying? We've been tending bar together a long time. Those 4 ice cubes mean you're making this. There's a little bit of that. Try that. Not bad. And language, the language of jazz, one of the things I think so many people don't really appreciate and recognize, it's a lot about listening. It's a lot less about playing. It's a lot less about blowing. A lot less about virtuosity. It's a lot less about look how great I am or how great that guy is. It's much more about, oh, see, I like what you just said there. Let me reverberate back to you with some of my own similar thinking and my own ideation. And let's see if we can't make a little bit of magic happen. And I think if more people heard jazz that way, it would change and redefine some of what we think of as classic, what we think of as the most important jazz records. Listening is such an important part of the art. And it's something I think a lot of records later on in jazz get away from. And Bitches Brew, for example, there's 10 guys talking over each other all at the same time. It's very confusing. Not a lot of dialogue happening in that. And then you listen to a lot of 80s jazz, some of that CTI stuff in the 70s. It feels somewhat canned and easy listening, in part because the dialogue and conversation is gone, because we tracked the drums and bass first. You laid your trumpet part, I came in and laid my sax part, and I can maybe make one kind of general reaction to you, but we're not playing off each other in the moment. It changes how it feels dramatically. What's that, Ben? Oh, sweets, let me tell you. It's not about stepping on the other guy's toes, trying to outdo the other guy, trying to outshine the other guy, outblow the other guy. It's about responding and saying, oh, I'm down with what you just said. I can feel that love. And I want to partake in that conversation with you by sharing my thoughts on what you just said. And there's really not a better way to enjoy jazz than to hear 2 cats who are listening to each other. Whether it's with Billie Holiday or on their own here. And we see some of that with Junior Cook and Blue Mitchell on the last record. They're listening. They're syncing up, sharing one mind, one soul, one spirit, transcending. That's witch doctor shit. That's medicine man shit. Our souls kind of touching and connecting and finding that magic vibration where I feel good enough right now that I can forget about all this physical world and step into a different energy, a different reality where paupers are now kings and kings become the paupers. When you can live and step and walk with magic, the art of the Jedi. You see what I'm saying? There's a power in that belief system, in that spirituality, in that interaction. That honest bearing of your soul, it's a responsibility for me as your partner to cherish that honest gift that you shared with me, Webster. You see what I'm saying? When someone gives you that gift of their integrity, their soul, and says something so guttural and so honest, you can't spit on it and give it a half-rated response. It requires your full investment. And that's the magic that makes this the music of the shaman. The magic of listening, partaking, spirits connecting. It seems so easy to talk about, and it's even easy to say, oh, I get it. But saying you get it and really that epiphanal moment where you're like, oh, yeah, that communion. It takes almost like a moment when you're disconnected from yourself and you stepped outside of your own experience for a minute, and there's just something where it's like all of a sudden it's like, just sink inside my soul. Like suddenly I'm kind of almost there with them in a way. I'm like, I can almost feel the tugging, the pulling, the expulsion of that sorrow, the sharing of grief, the hope that this communion brings me. There's a potency to it. And when you get that excitement from that experience, it's enough to go viral. It's enough to make you want to shout. And this music has that potency. And I think a lot of us are kind of overlooking some of the most potent stuff that was made, looking for something that sounds more potent. Sonically, it's very elaborate. But sometimes the subtlety gets lost. And that real make your hair stand up on the end of your arms magic can be not there. It's almost forced. And I can get as much response from this as I can from some of the heaviest stuff out there. Y'all be safe. I'll probably add a little bit to this tomorrow morning. Talk to you soon. Peace.